JVR. Oh, thank you. So, she's a senior researcher on the JVR team, but she's not only very well known for her research skills. She is really an expert when it comes to EQ as well, and understanding the EQI assessment that we'll be discussing to some extent today as well. But the importance of the construct, where it's applicable. I ever want to urge, and I don't want to waste any more of your time, Keys, but I do want to urge everybody to please interact with us throughout the webinar. Don't leave your questions till the end. And post them rather, and we can either respond or we can follow up with you afterwards as well. There's a lot of content. Keys have gone through the content with us a little bit earlier in the week, and there's a lot of content here. So I really hope that you find this as valuable as what I've done, but also that you ask your questions and respond and interact with us afterwards. So Keys, thank you so much for your hard work in putting this together. Just a side comment, this is not content that's provided to us. This is content that is absolutely generated from scratch. The analysis, the data, everything comes from Keys and from the research team in general. So hope you enjoy, and thank you so much, Keys, for doing this.
Thanks so much, Yanni. Natalia, I do see your hand is up. I think for now, yeah, if you can hear us and see us, maybe just put your question in the chat for now. But exactly to Yanni's point there, that we are wanting to make today as interactive as possible, we've actually thought we'd start the session with a little bit of a poll, or just to know who's on the call. So just looking through the participants, I mean, there are experts on the call. I see actually Dr. Baan is on the call as well. No pressure. Again, my EQ is being tested. But Sandra, I think you have a poll that you can just activate for us while I try to get my screen going. Super. Thanks so much. Yes, everybody, I think I'd love to just know the audience that we have today. Do you use the EQI 2.0 in your organization? If so, what age group is managing considerably well from an emotional and social health perspective? From what you hear, from who you interact with, who do you think is doing better? And then which of these EQ composites do you believe, or when in your practice, if you are using the EQ, do you think is the best predictor of workplace performance? Okay, and while we wait for that again, so Yanni and Sandra, Andrea, they will be my eyes. I don't have the chat open because I do get a little derailed. But yes, Jan, please let me know if there are questions as we go, and we can answer them. So just while everyone is just answering their questions today, like Yanni promised, I need to cover quite a bit. So workplace well-being, it is that time of year where things like burnout and derailing and quiet quitting become topical again. So we thought that this year we would get ahead of the curve and actually start you off a little earlier on how, before we get people to burnout stage, what are some of those well-being strategies that we could maybe implement before it goes completely out of balance. Then just, something like EQ, we sometimes think is really a soft skill. It's not. But how do we get business to buy into that? So I'm going to share some of the predictive work that we've done with the EQI 2.0 on how these skills actually influence work outcomes. Then, as we promised, if we're talking about the happiness equation, how do we crack it? How do we make sure that our employees are happy? And is happiness the same or different from emotional intelligence? And if so, great. If not, what do we manage when? Then EQI 2.0 by the numbers. So just by registering for this webinar, thank you so much. As a thank you, you're also going to receive this beautiful benchmark document for 13 different industries and job levels. But we're going to also talk very high level, some of those numbers and what does that mean for your industry and your employees and workforce across the age categories. And then from equation to action. So today, I mean, we're going to cover some theory, we're going to share some results, but what does that mean for your organization? Practically, what are some key takeaways that you can implement in your company? And yes, I mean, we are the JVR Africa group, so I'm talking from a psychometrics perspective, but we also have consultants, we have coaches online, and we have our academy. Thank you to the Academy team for giving us free CPD points for today's session. And maybe there is opportunity to maybe speak with the Academy team in particular for some coaching if you're not sure how to do it yourself. But I think, Sandra, maybe we can close the poll, just share some of those results, and then get right into it. Right.
Yes, I just want to say they're not free. You do still need to pass the quiz and give us your feedback. But yes, there's no monetary charge to this 1 point today.
Thanks for that clarification, Sandra. Yes, but I mean, you're not paying. We all know CPDs can sometimes be quite pricey. So pass your 5 questions, and we didn't make them super hard, difficult questions, but all the best for that CPD quiz that's coming. So very interesting. We have 18 participants who indicated that they are currently using the EQ. Hopefully we don't bore you, but we really show that there is value in it. There are 8 people who have dropped it in recent years, so we hope that this excites you again and gives you really that ROI and business case to reintroduce it to your companies. But by far, the majority says that they aren't EQI certified yet. And for you all, management have actually agreed for a 15% discount if you would like to now become certified, but more on that towards the end of the webinar. Then, which age group is managing considerably well from an emotional and social health perspective? 10 individuals say younger adults. The majority are saying middle-aged adults, and 7 of you are saying older-aged adults. Also, quite a number of individuals, 27%, saying they don't think there are any age differences. So one of these 4 groups will get bragging rights at some point. Please brag in the chat, interact, because we will share the results shortly. And then which of these EQ composites is the best predictor of workplace performance? Half of the sample of you are saying self-perception. 10% of 6 individuals are saying self-expression, and 24 or 40% are saying stress management. Hold on to that. You might be surprised which one is actually predicting work performance best. Thanks, Sandra, for the poll, and thank you everybody for participating. Right, so like I said, as we move into spring and summer and towards the end of the year, in general, these types of talks on burnout and well-being, resilience, stress tolerance, emotional intelligence, it becomes very topical, and it's like a cycle. Every year we start talking about it. I think we're also at a point where we need to stop just creating awareness, but start doing. When it does hit this time of year, that we actively consider this and actively work at helping our staff complements be better and manage the stresses of year-end and exhaustion. But just to get us going, I would want to share some studies that do happen around this time of year. And one huge one in this mental health space is the mental health quotient assessment, the mind and health survey that happens during the year. And it looks at global health. If we're looking at the MHQ, it is an assessment or it's a survey rather that looks at mind and health well-being across 6 domains. These 6 domains, if you are familiar with the EQI 2.0 model, they overlap quite nicely, which is also why I thought I'd share this research with us today. So if we look at it, let's start with maybe mood and outlook. That's really, are you optimistic? Are you generally happy with life? Do you see potential and hope for the future? Then we have adaptability and resilience. Again, looking a little bit at flexibility as well, but can you adapt to change? If you suddenly need to move. So, for example, COVID was one where our adaptability and resilience was really tested. But we've seen that not everybody has necessarily bounced back from that. We live in South Africa, and economic challenges also come with its own set. But you know what? South Africa, we are happy, and we are resilient in our own way. Cognition. So, if we're looking at mental health and mind health overall, does that affect or does that not affect how we problem solve, how we reality test, how we ensure that we are still making the best decision despite all the stress and emotional challenges around us? Mind body connection. So, if there are concerns, if we are stressed out, does that impact our physical health? Drive and motivation. So if we are stressed and are under some distress, how does that impact our motivation? How does that impact our willingness to go on? Especially since this time of year, we find a lot of people's levels of motivation really start to fall down. And then the social self. Even if you are struggling emotionally, can you still pitch up for your team, for your friends, for your loved ones? How do you show up socially? And ideally, all of us should be pitching up socially because we shouldn't be working in isolation. The full report is a very, very long report, but a very graphic report as well from Sapien Labs. But let's now unpack, because we had asked you, who do you think is struggling the most? So globally, they have been tracking people from pre-COVID due to like in the heart of COVID. And now, I mean, this last study was in 2024 and they published the report in February. It's a large sample. So we can say that this is pretty representative of our world's reality. Over 1 million respondents to this study, 71 countries. And they have seen that the overall recovery from the pandemic, especially if we're looking at outlook for the future, resilience, problem solving under stress, etc., has been quite low. So we still haven't reached the cutoffs that we were pre-COVID, and this is globally. Whether we can still blame COVID or we can just blame certain presidents of certain countries, that is not South Africa's president. I think you all know what president I'm talking about. Maybe that has impacted our resilience. But for all of those who said older adults, so those above 55, those individuals are really coming out as the most optimistic, the most flexible, the most resilient of the lot. So if earlier you had said older adults are showing the best mental health, please brag in the chat. And overall, across the world, we're finding that these older adults tend to have an average score of 110. So I have the scale there at the bottom, but their average MHQ is on the managing and succeeding side of the scale, very close to that overall norm of 100. Concerningly, across the world, we are finding that our younger adults, so ages 18 to 34, they are struggling when it comes to mind health, mental health, emotional health, with an average score of 38. So many of them just about enduring and pushing through life. But however, if we're looking at the sample, over 41%, so that's almost half, are experiencing debilitating distress. So they're either distressed or in that struggling range. And if we then don't look at age groups and look at this overall group average globally, we find that most people are managing fine. But of course, the idea is that we want more people to succeed and thrive. That's great and well, but I mean, we South Africa and we have Ubuntu going for us, and we have Uncle Cyril, and we have, our beautiful diversity. So let's bring it home a little bit. Same study, same assessment. We're looking at South Africa, 13,900 people. Again, I could say that's pretty representative. Our MHQ score overall is 50, and we rank 69 out of 71 countries, with 35% saying they are struggling, they are distressed, or struggling. So not good, not good. All of us on the call, let's do better. Let's help our fellow South African. We really don't know what their challenges are. So a little kindness can really go a long way. If we look a little bit further into our South African sample, our older South Africans, like the rest of our older sample globally, they are averaging in the 90 to 100 bracket, with only 11% really falling in that distressed range. So yes, once again, our older adults are doing better. Although our younger South Africans are on the higher end when compared to our global benchmarks, they're still in the 30 to 40 bracket, which if we look at the previous slide, isn't great. Like they're just about managing. Most of them are actually still enduring, but again, almost half are distressed or full on struggling. Challenges that we are seeing in this higher adult group, functions such as planning and organizing, speech and language, actually being able to find the words to find the emotional vocabulary to say I am struggling. They're struggling with that. Focus and concentration, probably also because of social media. It could be that, instant gratification, your phone is always here. To go onto Instagram or Facebook can have implications on focus and concentration. But I think if we're also looking at this overall, who's actually posting their failures on social media? So if you're comparing your very real life to that beautiful Photoshop lives that we're seeing on LinkedIn and Facebook and Instagram, that's probably also having a negative impact on our mental health. Social interaction and cooperation. I think we can all say that as we're looking at the younger generations, I'm putting myself into this because I do fall in that bracket, but sometimes you're sitting right next to the person, but you'd rather send them a meme on WhatsApp than actually just talk to them. It's a lot funnier. Relationships with others, yes, there's always that third person in that relationship, being your cell phones, and self-control and impulsivity. A lot more difficult today to not go on your phone than I guess 50 years ago. Writing a letter took time. So there are those challenges that we're seeing today. But if we now look at the same health and well-being challenges that we are seeing, but focusing now on the workplace, because we come to work to make money. And if you are not mentally healthy, well, you know what, we used to say that was your problem, but is it? And the few studies I'm going to share now is saying that, well-being and EQ is very much a business problem. It is your company's problem, and let's see how we can address it. So globally, again, I'm sure many of us on the call are familiar with Gallup. And if we look at their State of the Global Workplace report, global engagement declined to only 21% in 2024, compared to, I think it was almost 60% pre-COVID. Only 33% of these employees are thriving. If we look at it globally, that means $9.6 trillion in productivity would be added to the economy if the global workforce was fully engaged, representing a 9% increase in global GDP. Now, I don't speak in dollars, so that doesn't make sense to me quite yet, but that's why I'm going to translate it to rands and South Africa in a little bit. If we're looking at our South African context, 36% of our workforce are saying that daily they are feeling excessive stress. More than 71% of us have said that we are either disengaged or actively disengaging at work, which can be a sign of burnout, but is also signs of that quiet quitting that nobody wants to talk about. Last days of work, presenteeism, turnover, and premature mortality, so that your strokes and heart attacks, often due to stress, in South African terms now, can cost an estimated 161 billion. So that is 9 zeros per year. So very, very expensive. I think we can all agree that our economy cannot afford that amount of money. So let's chat about how we can ensure that people aren't taking sick leave when they aren't actually sick, when they are at work, that they are present, that they are engaging, or at the very least are just being effective, rather than just being a bum in the seat and not working. And how can we reduce this turnover? Of course, premature mortality, that's definitely one that we don't want, and we would like to reduce. Looking then at a purely local study from Gibbs, in October, they released their health workplace wellbeing report, and they completed this test in September. So like I'm saying, August, September, October, this is when all of this wellbeing stuff starts happening. And we saw that, with their study, 501 South Africans across the workforce, so ages 18 to 65, they completed the Gibbs Workplace Wellbeing Index that looked at mental, physical, financial, social, emotional, and work well-being. And their findings show that emotional and well-being at work consistently rated lower than physical, mental, or social well-being. So the nice thing about Gibbs is that they did separate mental and emotional and social well-being. If we look at emotional well-being, because that's really our focus of today, it's correlated strongest with mental well-being. So we're seeing that, there is definitely a relationship, but they are different, emotional and mental well-being. Emotional well-being's second highest correlation was with work well-being, and then weaker correlations with social, physical, and financial well-being. That financial well-being is all pretty much negligent. So I think we can say that if somebody is struggling emotionally with stress, if we talk about the EQ model, we will in a little bit. So stress management or decision making, we can't really blame their financial well-being on that. They appear to be very different constructs. And lastly, then I'm going to get into our research, stop promoting everybody else. But if we look at Old Mutual, they conducted their annual Wellbeing Pulse check-in in August last year, and they found that average stress went up from 39% in 2023 to 61%. That's almost double, and that is like almost 2/3 of the workforce in 2024. 70% indicated having felt burnt out and exhausted at some point of 2024. 55% felt overwhelmed, and 79% felt stressed out at some point. 20% admitted to having quietly quit. Emphasis on admitted, it might have been more, that had mentally checked out at work. And there was also an increase in conscious quitting, where people actually left the job and they either didn't give a reason for leaving, chances of them getting a better job was questionable. There have been individuals who simply left because the culture of their current organization didn't fit with them anymore. Many indicating that they left their job because their current environment did not align with their personal values. And I think that's then the focus, as employees are struggling, all of this research, I shared a lot, but it's kind of all saying the same thing over and over again. But as our employees are struggling, our businesses really are facing the risk of, one, losing valuable talent, but then dealing with not so nice statistics that, we're dealing with higher turnover rates. You're dealing with lower employee morale. Things like performance bonuses, who gets it, who doesn't? Are we going to just give everybody the same bonus? And with that, then you're creating this vicious cycle that is really fostering a toxic work environment and toxic work culture. It might be that, people are leaving and you're not replacing them, which means that whoever else is there, you're just increasing their burden tenfold because there's more work to be done. Even if you are replacing them, you're not onboarding somebody today and they can do the work tomorrow. It's a process. which is not creating a very comfortable environment for that team and the workplace as a whole. So let's take a step back to the EQ model. And if we just look at emotional intelligence and what we mean by well-being from an emotional perspective, it really is a set of emotional and social skills that collectively establish how we perceive and express ourselves, develop and maintain social relationships, cope with challenges, and use emotional information effectively. This was the definition provided by Multi Health Systems when they had released the EQI 2.0 model. But since today is all about equations, we thought we would put it into a simple equation for you. So EQ is being able to perceive emotional information, relate to that emotional information, as well as build emotional relationships with others, cope under emotional distress, and then applying what you're picking up in your emotional environment. Put differently, for those who do know the EQI 2.0 model, your total EI can then be your self-perception and self-expression, so how you're perceiving emotional information, plus your interpersonal, so your relationships, plus stress management, how you're coping, plus decision-making, how you applying. Right. So I do know that there are some people on the call who are very, very comfortable with the EQ model. And those who aren't, I am assuming that you are going to make use of that 15% discount and come get EQ trained. But for those who aren't familiar, the EQI 2.0 provides you a total EQ score that's a snapshot of your emotional and social skills. And that really, I think when it comes to decision making, that is the scale that it's nice to look at, but it really is a snapshot. Yes, it is normed, but it doesn't give that nuance of looking at the composites, of which there are 5: self-perception, self-expression, interpersonal, decision-making, and stress management. And then each of those composites can be broken down into specific subscales. So especially if you are talking like competency mappings, often we do go down to those subscale level. And even when we are talking about development of an individual, there is so much value in if you are working on building up somebody's self-regard, naturally their emotional self-awareness and self-actualization are developed as well. If you're looking at somebody's impulse control, well, why are you so impulsive? You know what? I shop, for example, when I'm super stressed. But how can we manage that impulse control? In doing that, you are naturally going to start talking stress management strategies. So the really nice thing about this model is that it breaks it down many ways. You can look at a total EQ score, you can look at 5 composites, you can look at 15 subscales, circular, if I can say so. If you're working on developing a specific element, it's going to have a positive knock-on effect on the other scales. And I'll show you that in some correlations that we did, although that's not the purpose, but for those who do like correlations and are research inclined, you'll see that play out in the data. So, like I promised, let's now talk EQ skills and work outcomes. The one study that we did, and it really was a preliminary study at this point, but the results were quite impactful. And if you are currently using it in your organization or looking for that business case, please also get in touch. We would love to work with your performance metrics and show how EQ can add value to reduce your turnover or to improve your clients and customers and employees' well-being overall. But this study that we did had 108 responses. That's why I'm saying it's preliminary, because it was a little smaller than our other samples that I was talking about earlier. Predominantly female, so 65 females compared to 43 males, 60% white with the other 40% then being Black, Indian, and colored. And in this sample specifically, we were looking at managers and higher, purely because, as you move up, or the perception is that as you move up the corporate ladder, EQ sometimes outweighs IQ. I think the studies that we reflected on earlier, that our younger individuals are struggling when it comes to emotional well-being, suggest that we should probably start assessing earlier, but that's a conversation for just now. So for this study, managerial and higher, and the industries was professional and financial services. And when we did a simple regression, looking at EQ and the managers' ratings of these managers on the individual work performance review that really looks at in-role performance. So that is your KPIs, your job description. Are you doing what you're supposed to be doing, what you're getting paid to do? Your extra role performance, are you a good team player? Are you adding to the team environment? Even though it's not on your contract, it's not a KPI, can the team and the company as a whole see that you putting up your hand, that you volunteering to do certain things? Adaptive performance, so we touched on adaptive and resilience earlier, but can you cope with change? And leadership performance, which, as you can see for the sample, would naturally be a little bit more important. But leadership, can you manage a team well? Can you network well? And counterproductive performance, those behaviors that we don't want in an organization. And when we just looked at the total EQ score, I'm not going to bore you, I'm going to run out of time if I need to show you all 15 subscales and the 5 composites. But if we just looked at that total EQ score and how that predicted performance, you can see wonderful regressions with leadership performance, naturally this being the sample, possibly an effect of the sample, but at predicting leadership performance very, very nicely, but across the board. I think if we're looking at Sackett's meta-analysis, personality-based EQ tests tend to predict approximately 30% of performance. So how the EQI is performing against that benchmark, I'd say quite nicely, very much well with against Sackett. Right, for those who, if my previous slide went over your head because you're not really a stats person, hopefully the graphs help. If we look at EQI, that total EQ score and overall performance, the higher your EQ score, so the EQ it has a norm of 100. So if you were above 100, your performance scores were also higher. Your managers rated you higher. If your managers rated lower, well, guess what? We saw that your EQ scores were also below 100. And then we replicated that across the performance dimensions that were measured. So same in-role performance, if you're performing your KPIs well, so when performance management time comes and you're getting 4s and 5s out of 5, then your EQ scores were also higher. Same with extra role performance. If you are that team player that everybody wants to be around, your EQ scores were higher. Adaptive performance, if you are someone that, you know what, we had load shedding, and then we had COVID, and then you were forced to work from home, and then the power was cut, but you still got the job done, higher EQ scores. Counterproductive, if you were that individual who was breaking the rules and always gossiping about everybody, then we saw that your EQ scores were lower. So higher EQ scores, lower counterproductive performance as expected. And then leadership performance, again, the higher your EQ score, the more likely you were to be rated as a good leader in your organization. So EQ and performance, so relationships, again, this is many, many correlations to break down. So I'm not, but you will get the slides at the end. So you can look at this. What I do want to highlight very heavily is that, so that's what the asterisks are trying to show, the most significant correlations, but we can see that across the board, whether we're looking at in-role, extra-role, adaptive, leadership, or counterproductive behavior, and again, whether we're looking at total EQ, the composites, or the subscales, they're all working together to actually predict performance. What I do want to highlight here is decision-making and the stress management composite. So again, those who said stress management in the poll above, please brag in the chat. But we can see that, yes, there are relationships throughout, but decision-making and stress management very consistent, very strong relationships throughout. Now, for those researchers on the call, yes, but yes, correlations does not equal causation. Well, we did show you a regression earlier, but let's take it a step further. Let's show you some dominance analysis. So dominance analysis is really, we had the performance metric, we had the EQ, and then we did a dominance analysis to really evaluate the relative importance or the weighting, the statistical weighting of the EQ in predicting performance. And across the board, so if we look at in-role performance, self-actualization was really high. So if you have that belief and that motivation that, you know what, well, I'm going to do better. So if you think Maslow for a second, I'm going to do better at work, and I have that internal drive to do better, that really influenced in-role performance. But a very, very close second was stress tolerance, followed by problem solving, optimism, and reality testing. Extra role performance, pretty much the same scales, just in a different order. Problem solving moves up to number 1, actualization to number 2, stress tolerance, and then we have independence. So very interestingly, if we're talking about extra role, those are those discretionary behaviors, those extra behaviors that you're volunteering to do to benefit your team and co-workers. But independence comes in here in that, you know what, you're first managing your own workload, and then you're taking that independent initiative to help others because it's extra role, right? So you're not being told to do it, you're doing it independently. And then reality testing again. Adaptive performance, ability to cope, big surprise then that stress tolerance came up number 1, followed by problem solving. So if we are stressing, how can we fix this? Those who adapt well have that problem solving mindset. Again, independence. How can I solve it? Not how can I make it my manager's problem? How can I make it my parents' problem? How can I solve it? Although here we were looking at work performance. So like assuming your boss then needs to solve it. Self-actualization, leadership again. So stress tolerance again, as you move up as a leader, I think you see a lot more problems. So being able to manage your stress, manage problem solving, independence again, self-actualization again, reality testing again. So we're seeing a pattern. And counterproductive. So those individuals who engage in counterproductive behavior, they don't have a very high problem solving, a very high stress tolerance, a very high self-actualization, optimism, or impulse control. So what you're seeing across the board, even though I'm looking at different aspects of performance, I would say and I'm not an L&D specialist, I have some of them on the call, but if you are struggling with performance at work, focus on things like stress tolerance, and problem solving. As you can see, that's the trend that we are seeing even on the previous slide from a correlation perspective. Stress tolerance, problem solving. Work on those, and with that, it will have knock-on effects on the other scales in the EQI model. But if you are struggling with performance or even decision-making and stress management, if you're wanting to work with it from a composite perspective. That's why we've color-coded it for you as well. Right, but then, today's topic again was the happiness equation. And the EQI 2.0 model also has what they call a well-being indicator that they call happiness. But that is separate from the EQI 2.0 model as a whole. So when I shared all of those scales earlier, you saw that happiness wasn't there. And even when you complete the EQI 2.0, you complete different happiness questions. The happiness items are separate from the rest of the EQI model, but it's nevertheless part of the EQI questionnaire. So the one asked is happiness actually the same or is it different to looking at self-regard, self-actualization, interpersonal relationships, and optimism? And if we do a quick correlation, we can see that happiness very much, again, is aligned and does correlate and probably overlaps quite a bit with something like self-regard. I mean, a 0.7 correlation, that is amazing evidence of convergent validity. For example, self-actualization, 0.5, high correlation. Emotional expression, which, I mean, if we're looking at the EQ report, they don't even talk about emotional expression. But you can imagine if a happy person also expresses themselves all the time, the knock-on effects in the environment. And across, I think if we're looking at happiness, the only one that has a slightly weaker correlation would be impulse control. But if that was a question, does happiness actually correlate with the EQI 2.0 model? Absolutely. And I think that's why it's founded, why it's reported in our reports. Nevertheless, they are different. So if we're looking back at our performance assessment with those 108 people who completed the IWPR and the EQ, just focus on the asterisks or the stars again, and you can see that there's a lot more stronger, significant correlations with the actual EQ scales, where there's self-regard, self-actualization, definitely a big one, optimism also a big one, not so much interpersonal relationships except for leadership performance. But you can see happiness, there are correlations there, but not so much. So again, if you're looking at your organization, what does this mean? Rather focus on improving their EQ skills than their well-being indicator or their happiness scores. Happiness is important, but things like if we're looking at bottom line and ROI and why to focus on EQ, I'd say rather focus on something like self-actualization, or like our previous slides were also showing us, that problem solving, that stress tolerance, than just trying to have happy employees. Happy employees by themselves might not be performing employees. And then the hierarchy of happiness. And this is where, again, I needed to do this really high level, but please do look at the benchmarks that you'll be receiving at the end of in the follow-up email. But if we're looking at job level trends, and if you are asking, well, is my boss happier than me? Maybe, because if we look at our results here, so now I'm not talking about the 108 people, but rather our whole norm sample. So the EQ was renormed and updated in 2023. And if we're looking at the data we've collected since, so between 2018 and in 2023, it is a sample of almost 17,000. It's 16,900 and something. And that data trends showed us that generally executives have the highest total EQ scores, which might be why they're in that executive role. And happiness scores are also the highest in executives, and employees have the lowest. Whether this is purely because this is their job level, we'll have to explore further, because generally our executives also tend to be a little bit older, and especially our entry-level employees, they tend to be a little bit younger. And if we're looking at the previous studies, and I will show you some age-related trends again in a bit, you will find that your older individuals tend to be happier and mentally well. But if we're looking then at this gap, the gap between employees and managers is more pronounced than between managers and executives, which means that as there is something there about moving into a managerial role that improves from the trends that we're seeing, tends to improve your happiness and your overall EQ scores. What we're also seeing is that the happiness boost is smaller, however, when we're moving from managers to executives, and this might be due to stress and role demands. Overall, though, there's no significant differences on interpersonal relationships. So whether you're an employee or an executive, the chances of that influencing your interpersonal relationship scores isn't that high. Although overall, we can say that if you are scoring higher on interpersonal relationships, even at an employee level, the chances of you then getting rated higher on performance and possibly then being promoted into higher roles is more likely. The largest differences, if we compare, is on stress tolerance and problem solving, where we see that your entry-level employees score significantly lower than managers and executives. Again, this might just be because your managers and executives have more experience in dealing with the problems of possibly having a better work-life balance potentially, or just, that's life, that's work. There will always be a problem. Let's take it into our stride. Whereas our more entry-level employees might not be able to see or might not have access to the bigger picture, or they new to the workforce. So any little issue, they are turning into a catastrophe. And it's a skill that they learn as they move up that corporate ladder. If we're looking at industry trends, I had so many slides for this one, and then you couldn't read it. So I just simplified it. And please then do look at the benchmarks for your specific industry and your specific employee level to just compare your candidates to industry and job level. But high-level trends, our relationship-driven sectors, so that's your healthcare, education, hospitality, we expect them to shine in empathy, so they do. Also remember that the EQI 2.0 is a self-report, but maybe it is that your EQ profiles choose your profession rather than the other way around. But this high empathy, if not met with high stress tolerance, high stress management as well, you could also be at higher risk of burnout. If we're looking at performance-driven sectors, so I don't know if that's the correct label for it, but if we're looking at our finance, manufacturing, technology, like get the job done, we don't really care too much about the feeling side of things. They really do excel in decision-making and adaptability, but that interpersonal blind spots of being able to check in with that colleague, have that empathy, like the relationship guys, that might affect the culture. So often if you think of your consultancies, I mean, KPMG and Deloitte, and I mean, those consultancies, they have been in the news for the high levels of suicide rates, for example, because they're not checking in that their people are doing fine. It's just push out, be productive. And lastly, if we're looking at our public sector, our poor South African public sector, they face the toughest combination because they have low self-belief, very little autonomy in the bigger scheme of things, lower stress management because the country is what the country is, and they don't have control over that, and far less happiness. So if we're working with public servants, that's where the empathy really needs to come in because they're dealing with a lot of systematic strain. But a lot more information will be provided in the benchmarks. And then age and gender trends. So on the one hand, I was like disappointed when I looked at this data in and of itself. And that's why I did that whole literature review at the beginning to just, okay, fine, the EQ is working in South Africa. We didn't do any of those other questionnaires, but we're seeing the same trends as we saw at the beginning of this presentation. EQ and happiness rise with maturity, and we tend to see a peak at midlife. So if we're looking at our individuals between 18 and 29, from our sample, there were 3,090 of them. They were scoring the lowest on almost everything, with the lowest being self-regard, stress tolerance, problem solving, independence, and assertiveness. Like I'm saying, I don't know what the impact of social media is on this younger adult group, and also something like independence. If you are talking to an 18 or 19-year-old, they just left high school where they needed permission to use the bathroom or needed permission to eat their lunch, and now you're expecting them to have high independence. These are skills that they will learn in time. So yes, it is a stress, it's concerning, but also, if we just think about where these people are in their life stages, maybe it's okay. How can we help them, though, to build up that confidence, to build up that resilience, and build up that decision making, to not have to ask their managers permission for every little thing? If we are looking at the 40 to 49 age group, unfortunately, I know my boss almost had I'm not midlife. Unfortunately, yes, you are seen as midlife, but we had 5,000 individuals in that age bracket, and they display the strongest EQ profile. I think they have their youth behind them. Hopefully, they're no longer in the dating pool. Hopefully, they've identified what makes them them, are happy, independence, and we are seeing that you know what, overall, highest decision making, higher stress management, higher reality testing, problem solving, stress tolerance, happiness, pretty much everything. So they balancing their lives. I think they probably also at the age where they of course they have kids, but their kids aren't like super young anymore. They starting to find their feet, both from a family perspective, from a work perspective, and from an EQ perspective. They've built up the skills that they need to cope. Then we're seeing as you decline, so 50 plus, they aren't always the highest across the EQ profile, but they're also not showing steep declines. So sometimes if we're looking at cognitive assessments, we do see that from 50 plus, you know, we start worrying about things like dementia and Alzheimer's and all of that. Not really something we need to worry about too much from an EQ perspective. They mostly on par, but as you move into those older brackets, just be aware. So the data doesn't show this like thoroughly, but I mean, as we're dealing with empty nest syndrome and those types of things, they might get a little bit lonely. So just something to be aware of. Like I'm saying, also look at all of this data, not as a shock, but in our journey of life and our life cycle, where people are, what they need to learn, and what their circumstances are at that point. What is really important, and of course we all psych practitioners here, but empathy is that exception. You'll see that whether you are 18 or 65 or 102, empathy doesn't really vary much with age. So just treat everybody with kindness, have that empathy for the other person, treat everybody with that warmth, and it can go a long way, because now I've just told you, you need to consider job level, and you need to consider age, and you need to consider, are you a manager or an employee or your industry? But just if you're treating everybody with kindness, that will also be replicated and appreciated across the board. Lastly, the data was a big enough sample to see that it's not just hearsay, but females really do score significantly higher on empathy, and our males really do score higher on stress tolerance. So just something to also account for in your training. And then my last slide, because I am seeing questions are starting to come through, but reflections and way forward. I've tried talking about them as we were going, but across the studies, and even if you're looking at EQI data specifically, we are seeing that our younger individuals and therefore our younger employees are a little bit more vulnerable than the rest of the workforce. So really, I think we as a whole need to prioritize those interventions that like peer support groups, like helping you deal with your stress. Even something like, now that we know that our 40 to 49 group can be these superheroes and our role models, try pairing up a younger employee with an older individual to role model those behaviors. I'm probably saying that a 40 to 49-year-old, because they have these EQ skills, won't get as annoyed with this younger one who's struggling with independence, who's struggling with decision making, because they themselves are so emotionally secure. You also note that your lower staff may face the sharpest challenges, so do try to include them and tell them what's going on in your company wherever possible and wherever is relevant, but mentoring them, coaching them, giving them more feedback on how they can grow and develop, that will help them build up that confidence and that independence and that coping skills. Industry trends also highlight different vulnerabilities, so do consider your industry. I think in finance, if you do go hardcore into let's do the interpersonal training, you might get a little bit of pushback. If you go into a near burnout net care style setting with nurses and doctors who are dealing with tragedy all day, every day, and okay, fine, let's take some time to reflect on you as a person. they might laugh and say, you know what, that's the luxury that we don't always have. So also consider the industry that you're working with. Consider the specific client that you're working with firstly, and identify where can we help them. But then also consider that maybe their score on decision making is low, but that's also kind of the norm within that industry. So maybe it's not such a big deal. Gender differences are smaller but meaningful, so just think about that and then really shift from away from awareness. So here's your EQI 2.0 profile, do a feedback and leave this person to figure out their emotions, but to really structuring those EQ programs. Like I'm saying, if you're getting an EQI 2.0 report, there's a lot of scales on there, there's a lot of information, and it can become quite overwhelming. Start with one or two. Start with saying, let's work on stress tolerance, or let's work on decision making, and take it from there. I know I am really close to cutting it, but Jan, over to you.
No, this was brilliant, Keys, and there's so much information. I think some of the comments that you have seen or that you seen popping up while you're presenting was around whether they will be able to receive this afterwards, which I did confirm, but I'm confirming now as well. The slides together with the recording and also the benchmarks that Keys keep on referring to will be made available to everybody. I think what is important here as well is also attendance register. Remember, if you're here for the CPD points, please complete the CPD quiz that is going to be sent to you afterwards so that you can get your CPD points. The benchmarks, I think, is really handy because oftentimes we look at EQ and we think everybody needs to be high, or if there's something that is low, that is something that immediately needs to be worked on. And I think the benchmarks just normalizes the profile, first of all, to some extent, so that you can actually compare it to what is typically found in the industry that you're working in. The context is so critically important, and that is what the benchmark document is ought to give you and ought to provide all the practitioners out there. Keys, there were one or two questions, and maybe one of the questions were around whether we believe the increase of EQ has got to do with experience, but also does it have, brain maturity? Does that have, does that play a role? Which I think I commented and I'm going to ask you as well, but commented in the chat box to say, I think there's multiple things at play, but it is a trend that we pick up. I don't know if you want to add to why we see an increase in EQ and then a slight decline, as to what do you think the main things are that is to play for that increase?
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. We gave one lens, and we were really looking for the most part at its influence at work. Because there's always those conversations of, but you're an employee. Doesn't matter if you like a boomer or a Gen X or whatever. Like, can we not do a one size fits all? So I think hopefully the takeaway is no, we can't do a one size fits all. But absolutely. I mean, and when we were talking about that brain maturation, absolutely. Where you are, so some people get married really young, some people wait for a little bit, some have financial security from a very young age, some never do. So there's so many, it's really difficult to say it's just you've matured biologically, or you're financially stable, or you were lucky and got the job of like it's difficult to really just give one. And that's, I think, also from a benchmark perspective, sorry, on why we looked at it from different angles. And really that benchmark is just to give a little bit more context, that if you're seeing somebody struggling, to not just, okay, fine, you're struggling, to, okay, but what does the rest of your industry look like? What does other people at your job level look like? What are other people within your age? So the ages aren't in the benchmark, it is in the technical manual. So if you don't have the manual, please reach out and we'll share that manual with you.
Absolutely. And I think another comment, and I know our time is up, but another comment just was around the effort that's required to actually assist people with a slightly lower EQ, especially found in your younger staff. you offer internships, etc., and the amount of effort. Now, first of all, I think that is why, selecting for a higher EQ, it's much easier to work with that when it is slightly higher, but also to just recognize the fact that it is such an important skill, and I think you cannot start young enough. I mean, I've got small kids at home, and just looking at creating a vocabulary around, that the world of emotions. It's such important skills to have and to start, from a very young age. And we can't wait until somebody enters a career before we start working towards, an advanced EQ. But
Absolutely.
I know that
I know that we're out of time, but if anybody, I mean, I completely understand if people do need to jump off, but if you can give us 30 seconds, I mean, that's why we are seeing a bit of a boom of looking at EQ in your younger populations as well. There's quite a few assessments, actually one on the same model for younger as well. So you can start, if you are privileged, to start looking at EQ from as young as 6 or even younger if needed. But if you are starting late, I don't think you should see that as a blocker or, oh, sorry, man, we started late. The beauty of EQ is that it's not the same as IQ, and we can, it is a muscle that we can improve over time. So even if you first learned about EQ at 35 or 40, that's what training is for. It is something that you can develop over time. So there's always hope for everybody across the job levels and ages.
Absolutely. And on that note, we're going to leave you for dinner, but we really thank everybody that attended, and all the information will be shared with you tomorrow. If you think of questions that you may have for us, or you want to schedule a call, please reach out to us. We will definitely do so, schedule back, and then take care of yourself. And thanks, Keys. Really appreciate it. It was really valuable information.
Thank you, everyone. Thanks, Yanni.
Thanks, everybody.
Thanks, Academy team. Okay, bye.